Indeed, we will now turn the floor over to Mr. Ted Whiteside to hear about NATO's perspective.
Thank you very much. And I'll start with a Ronald Reagan story. Ronald Reagan tells the story that he was asked to play a sheriff in a Western film, and they forgot to give him a gun before he went on to the set. So he said he was dead after 27 minutes and could not be resuscitated. And one of his family members a number of years ago said, and that story can apply to just about any human endeavor. And listening to the story about cyber defense, I think it is a very timely story about how we are not taking this issue seriously. So let me be serious for a couple of minutes and talk about how I see this emerging. Our diplomatic colleagues will have this particular question nailed down. When was the UN Charter signed? There'll be a moment of hesitation in some of our minds, and we'll recall it was in June 1945, before the first nuclear weapon exploded in August 1945, which changed the world forever. We live in a nuclear world, and we saw how vulnerable we were, our societies were, to a new technology, nuclear technology. I posit that we are, in June 1945, at a conference that precedes, but we are unaware of the scale that a cyber attack in the right place, at the right time, will bring to our societies, and particularly if it strikes the military, which has always been a force that we have counted upon as being working in our societies. Now, this vision is not apocalyptic. We know that we are closer to this vision than we ever have been. Why? Because we've seen the signs coming. In 2007, in April, a whole nation, Estonia, was paralyzed by distributed disruption of denial attacks, probably from neighbor Russia territory. We will never know who is actually perpetrating this attack, but the state of Estonia, certainly all its government services that had gone increasingly online, was totally blocked. We saw within the last year that the Iranian putative nuclear program, be it for nuclear research, be it for a nuclear weapons program, I do not know, was stopped by a Stuxnet virus. We saw a government, very highly secretive, very highly leveraged program with a lot of money behind it, stopped dead because of a virus. Third, when I go abroad to watch NATO summits are relatively classified events. We bring along a little machine which tries to tell us how many times per second people are trying to break into NATO unclassified or NATO classified systems which are deployed abroad. Hundreds, thousands of times per second with generated algorithms. What I'm pointing to, and what I think the General has also made the point very strongly, is that the 21st century is going to be a century where we not only count on informatics for our well-being, but we will be seeing ourselves as increasingly vulnerable to the type of disruption, both to corporate and also to the military. A world which will be like the world of 1945, changed forever. It will happen once. We will blame our governments, we will blame ourselves for the lack of foresight, and then we will get down to real business. What do we have to do now? What is NATO doing now? NATO has done 4 things, and then I will tell you the 7 things that we haven't done yet. So the 4 things that we have done. We have set up a NATO computer incidents response capability. If you have ever come to Brussels, you know we like long acronyms. This is an NCERC, and what it basically is a capability not to stop an attacker, but to at least be aware that an attack is taking place. It's a monitoring function. A NATO computer incident response capability in which we've recently invested about 80 million Canadian dollars. This is an ability 24/7 to let us know whether any of the many NATO systems throughout Europe and North America have been invaded. But this is an inexact science, as I'm sure our expert next on the panel will tell us. There is no 100% incidence response capability, but we have at least started with that one step. The second step is that we have created a number of computer emergency response teams. These are very small groups of people, 5 or 6, who are able to be dispatched to a particular site to ascertain what has actually gone wrong. What type of virus has entered the system? What is the best response? Can you close it down? Can you window it off? What is it that you actually do in terms of those first few minutes of response? We've also created something that we call, awkwardly, a cyber defense threat assessment cell. Now, this is not in response, but this is rather to create awareness, situational awareness. Where is the next attack likely going to be coming from? And here this is deep military and civilian intelligence. We know where cyber threats are coming from. We know which university campuses they are being developed in. We know what the funding for some of these sites are. So this is to create a bigger sense, a better sense of situational awareness, always with the caveat that this will never be 100%. Fourth, what we've done is created what we call a center of excellence, where civilians and military can be deployed. It's in Estonia, because Estonia took this attack of 2007 as a wake-up call. So there is now in Tallinn a center of excellence that looks at the legal aspects of cyber defense. Not the pragmatic so much, but what are the legal impediments to creating a new cyber defense system, and what are the legal issues related to the cyber domain. So those are the 4 things that we have done within NATO. Canadians have played a very big role in them, of course. What are the 7 things we have not yet done? We have started some work with our EU partners. You recall I spoke about the EU earlier. It's impossible now to imagine NATO doing something in the center of Europe without having our European friends and colleagues in the EU on side. So there is increasingly an exchange of information about best practices, but this remains embryonic. Second, we've realized that if there were to be a big attack, the nuclear attack from cyber defense, from a cyber advocate, we don't have the surge capability. So we have started to wrestle this issue to the ground. How much surge capability and resilience do we require to get your main operating systems back up and working? Remembering that Stuxnet not only stops service, but can actually stop your computer cold. So what is the resilience factor that we need? Third, we can't do this without working with partners. We must have partners on side. So we have started a very ambitious program with Microsoft and with others to talk about the vulnerabilities of the future and the vulnerabilities that they know about in their own software. They've been quite open with us because they do know what the vulnerabilities are. It costs a lot of money to close these vulnerabilities 100%, but we've started this dialogue with companies such as Microsoft and others. What we're not doing yet is to mainstream this work. In NATO headquarters, perhaps in Ottawa, I don't know, but certainly in NATO headquarters, this is still seen as the next emerging thing. There's a small group of people. They work at the end of a hall because they're the new people in the building. They have a small team. They are not yet mainstreamed. So this work has not become part of what we call the NATO defense planning process. And these capabilities have not been made accountable to all allies to have. So that we are still struggling with this mainstreaming of this work. I close with a relatively more optimistic note, however. We've just finished in Brussels a crisis management exercise, and I can speak about this relatively openly. The crisis management thrust this year was a WMD problem, weapon of mass destruction problem, but in an area where there were cyber probing going on and there was cyber disruption, but non-attributed. Now, if you've worked in government, you know that this is the worst nightmare of all. A little bit of probing, a little bit of prodding, a little bit of disruption, and no adversary you can put a name on, non-attributed. So we've been working with what the real world is going to be like when we lose a bank's system or D&D system or a NATO command and control system. No one is going to put up their hands saying, I did it. It will take a lot of forensic work to find out where this is, and we've been trying to test some of our responses, resilience, strategic communications, what do we say about these issues. So we are trying to get serious, even if this is a new challenge. Come back to where I started. I believe that if the 21st century is going to hold so much promise for humanity in terms of exchange of goods, exchange of knowledge, we had better be prepared for the worst of all, and that is when our information systems stop cold one day, as they may very well do. Our Microsoft colleagues tell us that this is not science fiction to talk about this happening, and I think that it behooves us, and this is why it's so useful to see the ACC take this on as a theme. It behooves us to think this through and to spend the amount of money that's required to protect ourselves from it. Thank you very much.
Well, thank you very much, Ted, for that very interesting presentation.